on to Wednesday. A pretty dim note as well. We started with two changes to that side that beat. Well, it felt like a win. We didn't beat United, but got a point at Old Trafford. It was Lavia and Theo Walcott making way. Benjy, what did you make of those? First of all, that taking those two out, and second of all, who they were replaced with.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sellers got it wrong. I had no problem with Theo Walcott coming out of the team. He's played a lot of football, and it appears that he's going to have to be important down the stretch. So he's the kind of player that I would see rested in a midweek game when you've got another big game at the weekend. Romeo Lavia makes really no sense to me to not play. I mean, I know he's had injuries this season. I know that they always talk about wanting to manage his minutes, not wanting to overload him, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is, at this point of the season, you have to start to take risks. And that is across all avenues of the game, whether it's actually in the game, what you're doing with the ball at your feet, or whether it's the team that you're picking. And Romeo Lavia is just far too important of a player to not include for such a crucial game against the team that sort of thrives in chaos and havoc. Brentford don't mind when the game is sort of all over the place and they don't have control. That's kind of how they like to play their football. And Romeo Lavia is by far the best player in the Southampton team, I think, at getting the ball down, turning away from a player, playing a pass between lines, and actually starting attacks that can lead to potentially something a little bit more dangerous or take a few players out of the team. And I think that if he made the tactical decision to use Ibrahima Diallo instead of Lavia, then it was just the absolutely wrong decision. And if he made sort of the health fitness decision to leave Lavia on the bench, then I think it was also absolutely the wrong decision. But either way, I don't think there's a great excuse for not playing a top three most important player in the team for a game that was unbelievably important.
Yeah, it was like a cup final that we'd lost last night. Every game is now, let's face it. But yeah, to leave him out, I assumed it would have been a fitness thing, seeing the lineup and thinking, oh well, we got 3 games in a week. He's probably going to want to save him for Tottenham, X, Y, and Z. But his reasoning afterwards didn't quite align with that. It was kind of like, well, Diallo deserves it because of what you showed me in training, and that one really was a head scratcher. I was like, really. In a game like this, unless he was sugarcoating for certain issues and didn't want to worry anyone, that's a bizarre reason. Yeah, Martin. So we were dreadful. We were absolutely dreadful. I mean, we had was it 60% possession? We touched on it before we come on air between us, but they played Ethan Pinnock and Ben Mee at the back, both 6 foot and 6'2" between them, and we played 2 effectively 5'9" support strikers to try and defeat them. That clearly didn't work. We had one shot. We registered one shot on target the whole game. David Raya had no problems whatsoever. Our crossing was woeful. Shocking referee, and we didn't help ourselves with it. What did you think was the key element out of all of that really let us down?
The biggest thing to start with is not playing your best player. You've got to play your best player in your biggest games. I was furious not to see Lavia start last night as a football fan. He's been our best player. He was our best player at United. I wanted to see him on the field. I think he dictates what we do. Everything we're good about, he's good. And we missed him massively, I thought, in that first half. And there was times in the game when Lavia will find a pass. He will look to unlock a defence and he drive with the ball. There's nobody in that midfield that would take a risk last night. There's times in transition at 0-0. There were times when we just needed to turn the ball and ping it in the corner. Just get people in behind. Have a run at there. And they played 3 at the back. There was potential just to get in behind them, but we never really got up against their defenders, did we? We never got in behind them. The transition in play is just too slow. It was so predictable. And the minute they got they were waiting to nick something from a corner. And the minute they scored from a corner, they were going to sit in and play a low block. And it's exactly what they did. And we're predictable to play against because we can't break down low blocks. And it was it was just the team selection. I thought it sucked the life out of the crowd, actually, to be honest. You see Ali Newsy in it as well. Your best player's not playing. It sucked the life out of it. And I didn't think the atmosphere was anywhere near what I thought it was going to be last night. I was actually really disappointed, if I'm honest, Josh. I just didn't think there was a buzz about the place, which it needed. It needed everyone really up for it last night.
Yeah, Yeah, I think again. I think everyone reading their phones, and the amount of people I heard walking past me going Elianusi, Elianusi. You know, to be honest, I almost choked on my burger when I saw the lineup and seeing that Elianusi was starting. I was baffled. Even more so than Diallo starting, because again, I just put it straight down to fitness. I think, well, if he's keeping Lavia fresh, okay, why on earth is Elianusi starting? Um, Mark, can you sort of give me a rhyme or reason as to why, I mean, me and Benji touched on it before we come on, but there's three managers now who still pick Moy, and Benji rightly said he doesn't get any better. Like he doesn't. He offers what he offers, and for me, that's nothing. But I'm not as trained as you guys. But what? Why does he get these minutes?
Short answer, I've got no idea, honestly. It does baffle us. Look, I don't want to beat him up too much, because there are moments where a player like Moy Elianusi is really important. And I think it is important to say that as well, because there are periods in games where a player like him, who he is incredibly tactically aware, which is something that, as a general football fan, I mean, you said having a trained eye. I don't think we even have. You don't need much of a trained eye to see that. I think he does the job that he's asked to do very well, and I don't think he is particularly. I don't think he's in the team to provide an attacking outlet, which it beggars belief, because if you're playing in one of three positions, maybe four, including a number 10, if they're in a 4-2-3-1 that needs to create the chances, then why waste a position on a player who historically doesn't create those chances, or hasn't done for a long time? Because obviously he has done in a Southampton shirt before, but it's been a long time since we've seen that. I just thought it was a strange one, and I think there are options elsewhere in the squad to go with. And we talk about this kind of, he was saying about Diallo in training and this kind of stuff, but the reason the decision stunk so much for me was because it was so out of the blue. We've not had Diallo in a matchday squad for a couple of weeks. Elianusi hasn't really had much of a sniff. If he has done, he hasn't really done anything with those games. I mean, he obviously started in the Chelsea game, and then the Leeds game as well. Maybe it was him and Stuart Armstrong, and I thought we'd moved a corner where Ruben kind of looked at that and thought, you know what, I don't think that's going to work. I think dropping Theo probably the right idea, as Benji said, with Saturday coming up. I think he is going to be an important player in the run-in. But yeah, my God, talk about a way to just kill the mood before kickoff. Ruben's been there all year. He should understand, how important it is to get the fans behind your back in this kind of season, especially. But yeah, trust me, you weren't alone hearing people say Moy, because in that press room at St Mary's, trust me, there was a lot of people saying the exact same thing, mate.
Yeah, that's an interesting take, and it's interesting to hear. I will ask you quickly, because you said something there. He does what he's asked to do. Now, I, watching him in that first half, was trying to figure out what he was asked to do, or what he was doing. He was out wide, then he was in the 9, then he was out wide again, then he was, quite frankly, fucking nowhere, doing nothing. So what do you think Ruben's instruction to Moy was that night, on Wednesday? What do you think he said to him to say, this is your job? Because I couldn't work it out personally.
Well, this is the thing. Ruben is a different manager in a lot of ways to Ralph and to Nathan, in that I can't say there's any certainty, but I don't think he is much of an individual instruction kind of person. Every time you ask him about these kind of things, everything is about the team, and it's about the fluidity in possession. It's about, Martin mentioned it earlier, the transition, which has probably been Southampton's biggest poor this season. They just can't transition the ball at all, and players like Moy are the ones you need to do it. But in terms of what he was meant to do, I think it's almost a knock-on effect to the players around you as well. I don't think. Look, I have to be careful with what I say here, because at times this season I've been so frustrated with players like Che Adams, but at other times I've been like, oh, amazing! I'm so glad what you're doing. But it does feel like players like Che, even Carlos as well, and I mean, I don't know if we'll talk about him later on, but Kamaldeen Sulemana, who I thought was rubbish last night. I think all of them don't really seem to get that idea, and it comes back to what Martin says about breaking down a low block. They don't know what to do. They get the ball and they recycle it, or they go backwards. There were so many boos last night whenever they would go backwards. And it does kind of allude to the idea that maybe there isn't that much individual attention given to the tactics for each individual player. And it's more of a general idea of how they should break down the team, of how they should try and prepare themselves. And I just don't think it's going to be fruitful enough in the last 11 games, especially when you've got teams coming up against you like Spurs, who on Saturday will, be rejoiceful at the idea of coming up against players that don't really want to attack, and you switch it up and you try and bring on Onuachu and all these type of people, and there's no consistency in it. And when you do bring on those changes and the whole game plan shifts, the players that were on before, they kind of go, right, well, I guess we're going to go long now. And what we saw was just nothing. It was just humping it into the box, hoping for anything. Nothing was coming off, and no one decided to stand up and change it. It was just the exact same for those. And I think this is a kind of the worst thing a journalist can do, but we all do it, is writing your match report way before the game's even finished. I mean, you get lost if there's a late goal, and any journalist can tell you that the amount of times you get stung by a late goal and you got to rewrite your match report is a killer. But last night, I had my match report done on 60 minutes, and I knew nothing was going to change. All I had to do was change the scoreline from 1-0 to 2-0 in extra time, because they just didn't look like scoring at all. We had barely any chances. But yeah, just disappointing overall, and individual tactics just don't seem to be a thing at Southampton at the moment, to be honest.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Benji, would you have anything to expand on that with regards to individual tactics or even individual situation tactics, if that makes sense? I.e., bringing on Tall Paul last night for me should have happened at half time, seeing how poor we were against those tall defenders, and we should have addressed that straight away, in my opinion. Any expansion from you with regards to that, with the game plan?
I think Mark pretty much said it as well as anyone could. There was really, it felt like only one plan, which was get the ball wide and throw it into the box and see what happens. And that can't be your only tactic in the Premier League, because that's way too easy, particularly when you're up against a team like Brentford, who excel so much in that. And I think that Southampton, at their best with this personnel, with Shea Adams up front, I think at their best, they've got Shea Adams dropping into space to sort of pull center backs away. And then you've got guys like Charlie Alcaraz making deeper runs. You've got Kamaldeen Suleimana sort of roaming, so that it's hard for defenders to pick up these players because they're not in obvious positions. If Charlie Alcaraz is just hanging sort of in the middle of the pit and giving away the ball and not making those deep runs, it's pretty easy to monitor him because you know these sort of areas that he's going in. But what was so dangerous about his runs against Leicester was that he was making runs that you'd expect the striker to make, and it was confusing them and sort of shaking them up, and Shea Adams was bringing players with him, which was then opening up space, and there just wasn't a lot of those sort of counteracting movements last night. When one player would make a run, the rest of the team would just stay totally still. When another player would make a run, the rest of the team would just stay totally still. And it was very bizarre and looked like a group of players who had never really played with each other in their entire lives, which shouldn't be the case at this point. And then I think that Paul is an interesting character or an interesting player, because I think if you're just going to try to cross him, that isn't going to work. He's tall, obviously, and that's great, but the Premier League is hard. These center backs are incredibly good, and they don't mind that. They don't care how tall you are. They're pretty happy to just defend their box and head everything clear. That's the reality. Ben Mee is a better center back than Paul Onuachu is as a striker, and it doesn't matter how big Paul Onuachu is. Unless the delivery is 100% perfect, Ben Mee is going to be better at heading it clear than Onuachu is going to be at heading it on goal. That's just the reality, and it's also because scoring goals is way harder than keeping them out. But for that to be the only tactic for the last 20, 30 minutes, I think just explained why Mark had his match report done so early, because we all no one was expecting that goal to come, because they never created anything that made it seem like a goal was going to come.
Just on that, Benji, as well, I mean, I could be leaving myself open, and in the last 11 games, maybe Paul and Kamaldeen and co are going to, fire the club to safety. But at the end of this season, I mean, there's going to be a lot of things to look back on and point to and say where things have gone wrong. But I think a lot of us probably at the end of the January transfer window were really pleased with the business that was happening. But if you look back at that business now, Mislav Orsic, failure. Kamaldeen Suleimana, right now, failure. Paul Onuachu, failure. James Bree, failure. Carlos Alcaraz is the only one that has done anything in this team. And I don't want to dig him out too much. I'll go back to Kamaldeen Suleimana. No end product, no decision-making that's working. You get a couple of good jinks and tricks and a couple of good paces. He just looks like Moussa Djenepo 2.0. I cannot see how this is a record-breaking signing designed to come and save Southampton's season. And to see the performances he's been putting in. I know he's a young man. And I know he's got plenty of development to grow into. But Southampton didn't buy Kamaldeen Sulemana for 3 years' time. They bought him for now. They bought Paul Onuachu for now. And it just screams of more mismanagement and just, awful decision-making. Again, I could leave myself open there, and I hope I do. I hope they go and have an amazing end of the season. But right now, it just looks like yet another thing to tick off the list of awful decision-making by the club.
Yeah, I'm going to come in on that as well. Awful recruitment. But Danny Ings was available. And Mark's bang on with what he's saying. The signings have been poor, but Danny Ings was available. And because he didn't have a sell-on value, why didn't we go and get him? It's like 3 players there. There's 3 wages up for grabs. There's a transfer fee. Danny Ings will keep West Ham in the Premier League. There's no question he will score goals. I just think we were crying out for him. We needed a striker that was proven in the Premier League, a proven player for now. And we didn't do it. And it will cost us our Premier League survival. No question.
Yeah, I agree. I'm very wary that, Mark, you need to get off. So I'll leave you on one more question, mate, if that's okay. You touched on Kamaldeen quickly there, and I agree with every word you said there. By the way, he's looking to he's starting to shape like Gineppo 2.0, and it's a bit scary. How do you think that's happened so quickly? Because for me, against Wolves, I was so excited. This guy looked unbelievable against Wolves. In fact, the only player who looked like he could create something in that game for us.
It looks like a YouTube player, doesn't he, Josh? I remember when I was younger and I used to, I got excited about new signings for my club, and I go on YouTube, whack their name in, and go, "Oh, do you see that nutmeg? Do you see that turn of pace? Oh, I'm well excited to see him." He feels like that right now, and I think to get the best out of him, you need to play for him, and Southampton can't afford to do that right now. To be honest, they can't afford to play around one player, and a player that is naturally a winger who's playing a bit of a narrow role in Ruben Siller's 4-2-3-1 doesn't bring the best out of him. I don't think the players around him quite understand what to do with him. There doesn't seem to be the right relationship with him and whoever is playing behind him at fullback, which is obviously an incredibly important position in a relationship to develop when you're a winger. I don't think the consistency has been there with the player behind him. But yeah, it is really, really disappointing. And I said this last night, I said it to Benjy as well. He's now hit that ignominy of the 007s. 7 games, 0 goals, 0 assists. And although that's nice to make a joke about, it's really disappointing because the amount of stuff that we put on him. And like you said there, Josh, that Wolves game, I was the exact same. I think there was a moment. I'm imagining it sitting in the press box now, but it was the far side for us, and he jinks the ball over a defender and tears down the wing and gets a cross in. And after that, I was thinking, here we go. We've finally got a player here that is going to actually attack and attack and attack. It feels like it's been coached right out of him already in 7 games in less than 2 months, which is just indicative of the whole situation, really.
I agree, mate. I totally agree with you. Mark, thank you very much for your contribution tonight, my friend. I expect you'll be on again soon. But yeah, thank you very much for your chats tonight, Mark, mate. And enjoy your
guys.
Cheers,
Thanks,
Mark.
guys. Bye now.
That was Mark White, Hampshire Live, and I'll move on to you quickly, Martin. Just to sum up before we move on to Spurs, which is also going to be horrifically depressing and also make me want to cry. Could you give me any silver lining? Was there anybody who performed on that pitch and deserved to perform on that pitch on Wednesday?
I don't think anyone comes out with any credit in the end, really. When I reflect upon it, nobody. I just think it was a game there that if we won last night, what more of a motivation do you need? And the opportunity to get out the bottom 3 for the first time this year, an opportunity to probably get into 15th. There was a huge opportunity with us. And we bottle it every time we get a big opportunity. We bottle it, and I'll be glad to see the back of some of these players now. To be totally honest with you, mate, because there's no doubt we will probably go down now. I think it will be very difficult for us, but no, there's nothing you can take away last night. Like Prowse, he plays the ball around a lot, but he's got nothing in front of him to kind of find a killer pass. As he works really hard, he runs hard. He's just let down. Just what's around him is just. No, I don't take any Walker Peters until he got injured. I guess that he's been playing well. He's the outlet every time, wasn't he? Really, in that first stage of that second half, he was the one out ball that we had. He's a fantastic player, I've got to say. And Spurs must be kicking themselves letting him go, by the way, because he's He's a top player. Professional. He looks after himself. He's lost a fair bit of weight from his days at Spurs, but he's still strong, isn't he? So, yeah, I'd just come back to your question. I'd probably say Kyle Walker-Peters. He's had 2 really good games for us, really.
Yeah, I agree. It was gutting to see him pull up with. I saw it straight away. As soon he stepped awkwardly, grabbed his hamstring, I was like, he's done. That's it. I didn't even think he'd stay on after he sort of tried on. I thought, no, he's going down in a minute. That's so frustrating. James Bree did half the job when he came on, but James Bree's what James Bree is, isn't he? He's a second tier fullback. But at the end of the day, you can't pretend to be anything else because he's not. At the end of the day, so and that's not an insult. That's just what it is. Benjy, one last thing from you on the Brentford game. I don't know. Did you get to chat to anyone after the game? If so, what did they say? I think Mark caught up with Roman Perro. I don't know if you managed to as well.
Yeah, Mark and Alfie spoke with Romain, and then I spoke with Ruben Celis after the game. But
Yeah.
Romain's always good to chat with because he's always got a lot of fire, no matter the situation, and he wears his emotions on his sleeve, which is nice to see, even if it is not enough, I guess, to make up for what was a pretty poor performance from him and the team. I think just one thing on Kyle Walker-Peters with asking, I don't think I asked it, but someone asked Celis after the game about the injury, and it sounds like it was more of a kick to the hamstring than sort of a pull or a strain, which is probably better news. They're going to have more tests on it today, so we should find out in the press conference tomorrow what the severity of that is. But with any luck, it was just like a little knock rather than anything more muscular.
Yeah, so I was sort of right in front of it as it happened. From what I saw, he was running with, I can't remember whether it was Mbeumo or Tony. It was one of the two. He was in the motion of passing it back to Bazunu, and it looked like he caught a knee to the back of the leg, and he grabbed it sort of after he'd landed, and I thought it was the landing that did it, but it must have been, if he's saying it was impact, it must have been he must have caught a stray knee. So yeah, just fingers crossed that that's not as bad.